So what we're going to look at today is a really brief span of the written word. So we're starting with the very first story ever told in Mesopotamia. Then we're going to look at the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire, which are generally considered to be the start of Western literature. And then we'll start with the medieval era, which is where we first really get old-fashioned English being spoken. And then we'll go on with the Renaissance, which is usually a fairly big area of study for later years. So, Mesopotamia and the first story ever told. So it used to be considered the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia. It was a civilization located where Iraq and Syria are today, and they were very complex in terms of literature and mathematics, a lot earlier than the West. So the oldest known story ever recorded is the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it's a series of Sumerian poems that are preserved on clay tablets, with this funky looking writing that we have on the board over here. It's about the mythological hero King Gilgamesh and his search for immortality when his friend Enkidu dies. So basically he wants to go to the underworld and rescue Enkidu. And that becomes a very popular theme in a lot of really early literature. So basically this is what we call the epic hero genre. Hero goes on a quest, often has to do with supernatural things, and it becomes common in Greek and Roman stories, which are very influential on Western literature. Then we start with the Greek Empire, and in the Archaic period, we're not really talking about Greece as a country yet. It's more like a loosely associated group of tribes, so very early in the piece. And in the Archaic period, we have a guy called Homer, who writes the epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, which you can still buy in bookstores everywhere today. And these two stories describe the Trojan War, and Odysseus, who is the Trojan War's war hero, he takes 30 years to get back home. So that's another book as well to look at. So these again are sort of your epic hero stories. They are revered for vivid depictions of war and peace, honor and disgrace, love and hatred. So we're taking a very simple story, and now we're starting to think about the abstract notions of what makes a good leader. Then we have the classical period, and this is pretty much when Greek plays got invented. So lots of them were written. Aeschylus invented tragedy with the Orestia, which again goes back to the Trojan War. One of the kings who went to the Trojan War, Agamemnon, returns home after a really long time away, and his wife and his wife's new lover conspire to kill him, and a big curse falls on their family. So that's pretty much the first story with a bad ending. And then we have Aristophanes, who invents comedy with the Lysistrata and the frogs. So Lysistrata is again another war story, Peloponnesian War this time. And basically the women folk of Greece are sick of the men always running off to war, and so they kind of hold a strike. And they are not going to sleep with their husbands until their husbands stop the war. So it becomes a very humorous battle of the sexes. So that can be worth a look as well. Sophocles invents irony. So again, now we're getting a little bit more sophisticated. We're not just telling a story, we're having unexpected twists and things like that happen. In the story Oedipus Rex. Now again, another creepy story. A lot of Greek stories are creepy. This one is about a young man called Oedipus who is abandoned on a hillside as a child. So he has no idea who his mother and father really are, but he's a clever young man and he defeats a big monster called the Sphinx and he becomes king of Greece. And as the king, he gets to marry the queen of Greece. And unfortunately, through a series of unfortunate revelations, he discovers that the queen is actually his mother. So you have a man marrying his mother. And this archetype is really influential on Western literature, and also Freud picks it up and talks about it in psychology. So it's probably, even though it's a little bit weird, it's probably a good one to know. We also have philosophy starting. So Socrates is probably the most famous. He gets executed for leading the youth of Greece astray by saying things like the gods might not be real. And Plato, who is his student, writes down all of Socrates' ideas, and some of his own as well, in a book called The Republic, which is basically just like sitting in someone's living room and four big thinkers talking and arguing about what's right and what's wrong with Greece. Then Aristotle, who's a student of Plato's, starts tutoring Alexander the Great, who becomes the great leader of Greece and expands the Greek Empire. So he goes into Persia, Egypt, and all the way down to northern India, and is probably one of the reasons that Greece influenced so many people, because with the war, they spread their language and culture. Then we have what we call the Hellenistic or Alexandrian period. So this is kind of like the last legs of the Greek Empire. So Aristotle investigates science, philosophy, and drama, and he also establishes the first criteria for literary criticism. Now this is important because we're not just making stories anymore, and even complicated stories. We're now thinking about critiquing them and what makes a good story. So the whole literature study is becoming much more complex. Another important person to know would be Plutarch, who wrote an ancient history book called Plutarch's Lives. And so he basically tells the story of Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, famous figures in the modern world, or in the ancient modern world maybe. And he writes down these sort of fantastic accounts of their life and becomes the source that most moderns use to understand these characters, including Shakespeare, who writes about Julius Caesar based on this book.